The economy of the Russian Federation has indeed collapsed and is going under. Even the Russian President Vladimir Putin admitted this today. At a meeting on economic issues, Vladimir Putin publicly stated that the dynamics of the main macroeconomic indicators of the Russian economy became negative at the beginning of 2026. At the same time, economists, even those close to the Kremlin, admit that a severe recession is already being observed, and by the end of the year it will only get worse. Moreover, the Russian budget is not balancing, the deficit is growing rapidly, oil and gas revenues are falling, even despite the crisis in the Middle East. That is why the government of the Russian Federation simply announced a sharp reduction in the spending part of the state budget. My name is Pechiy, let's discuss this topic together. But before we start, I ask you to support the work of this YouTube channel financially, with your donation, paid subscription, or sponsorship on YouTube. All the links and details on how to do this are in the description of this video. And at the end of this episode, if you find this information useful and interesting, you can support this episode with your donation or any form of support. Also, subscribe to my Telegram channel, Pechiy News. The link to it is also in the description of this video. Now let's get started. So today, Vladimir Putin held a meeting on economic issues and, for the first time, publicly admitted that the dynamics of the main macroeconomic indicators of the Russian economy at the beginning of 2026 became negative. Next, I will quote the bold dictator Vladimir Putin. First of all, there is a low negative trend in the main macroeconomic indicators. Actually, there is nothing unexpected for us here, but the statistics confirm it. In January of this year, the gross domestic product was 2.1% lower than a year ago. Industrial production decreased by almost 1%. However, mineral extraction actually increased by as much as 0.5%. This was even before the increase in global energy prices. As a result, Putin called on the Russian government to return the country to, quote, a trajectory of sustainable economic growth, while at the same time preventing both a surge in inflation and destabilization of the labor market. As for the federal budget, for January and February, it had a deficit of 3.5 trillion rubles and faced a decline in overall revenues. Putin stated that balanced decisions need to be made and its long-term stability must be ensured. But the funniest, simply ridiculous quote from Vladimir Putin was about the reasons for such an economic decline. Well, what do you think Putin said? Why did the Russian economy start to decline? Why are the dynamics of the Russian economy negative? So, Vladimir Putin says that the economy declined because there were simply fewer working days than usual in January. This is not a joke. Here's a quote from Putin. You know, and experts are talking about this so-called calendar factor in January of this year, since there were fewer working days this year than last year. That's such a funny excuse. I'll point out that the decline in Russia's GDP in January, which was previously reported by Rosstat, was the first for Russia since 2023. Because last year, according to official statistics, the country's economic growth slowed down almost fivefold to 1% and turned out to be half of the government's initial forecasts. Out of 28 main industries in Russia, 21 ended the previous year in the negative. Mineral extraction decreased by 1.6%, metallurgists reduced production by 2.1%, clothing and footwear factories by 3.5%. For the first time in 15 years, food production dropped by 0.5%. Another interesting thing is that for the current year, the bold dictator Vladimir Putin initially planned growth of more than 2%. Then he lowered the forecast to 1.3%, but even that turned out to be too optimistic. As a result, they want to lower this growth to 0.7%. But how come? Did the increase in oil prices really not help Putin at all? It helped, but not significantly. Since the beginning of the year, Russia has already lost more than 300 billion rubles. According to economists, all the assumptions built into the Russian Federation's budget turned out to be wrong. According to the government's forecast, on which it was based, a barrel of Urals oil was supposed to cost an average of $59 per barrel this year. However, in January, they had to use $41 for calculating oil and gas taxes, and in February, $44.6 per barrel. Meanwhile, the ruble proved too strong. The budget was based on 92 rubles per dollar, while in practice the exchange rate averaged 77 rubles. And so, to increase revenue, the Russian government once again raised taxes. In particular, it revised the VAT rate. Meanwhile, at the beginning of the year, expenses were growing ahead of schedule. In the first 2 months, they increased by almost 6% compared to the same period last year, although according to the government's plan. The growth was supposed to be only 3%. And here it should be noted that the war of the US and Israel against Iran has become an unexpected gift for the Russian economic authorities. Oil prices have risen sharply due to the threat of the blockade of the Hormuz Strait. This is such a narrow maritime corridor through which the countries of the Persian Gulf export oil to the world market. So the price of a barrel of Brent has risen from 70 to more than 0%. $110. The price of a barrel of Russian Urals oil has approached $80. Some deals were even made at almost $100. But in March, oil and gas revenues for the Russian budget will still be modest because taxes will be calculated based on the low February price. In April, if prices remain at their current level until the end of March, the Russian budget will be able to receive about 590 billion rubles. What will happen? Дальше неизвестно. The best that can come out of this situation is compensation for the losses from the first 2 months of this year, so at best, hopefully they'll just break even. As a result, the Ministry of Finance of the Russian Federation announced that it would cut spending. In particular, it was announced that all national expenditures would be reduced by 10%, although there are sectors that, of course, will not be affected. These are defense, national security, and law enforcement activities. So in short, they won't touch the money for war and the repressive machine, but all other areas will be cut to save money. First of all, they will cut so-called economic spending items. For example, these are various national projects, investments in infrastructure, construction of roads, bridges, schools, hospitals, kindergartens, and so on and so forth. All of this will be cut. Well, in other words, to preserve the bloated military spending. Russians will simply be deprived of basic development. Well, that's exactly what Russians were striving for, isn't it? The main thing is to keep the war going. The main thing is to keep sending their Russian guys to die on the holy Ukrainian land. That's more important. And the fact that their living standards will drop, well, that's no big deal. Russians delayed the search, but everything's fine. Because Vovka Putin said to do it that way. By the way, let me tell you a little joke that's actually reality. I saw him today, and I was just amazed. If you don't know, right now in Russian Siberia, they come, take away the cattle, kill them, and say, well, that's just how it has to be. And so they try to somehow explain what's going on. And there was this one, Kashevarova, who is considered a disgusting person, even among those Z propagandists. So she's a propagandist. She made a statement. Why? What's really happening in Russia? The economy is collapsing, cows are being taken in Siberia, Telegram is being shut down, and internet access is whitelist only, among other things. And so she says, quote, I believe that all these anti-people decisions, laws that destabilize the situation in the country, come from Western agents of influence who, being in the Russian government, push them through as the only possible solution. So, shutting down Telegram, destroying livestock, cutting off the internet, undermining the law, raising taxes. And others can't oppose them because they're either corrupt or ignorant and lack the strength of spirit and knowledge in these areas. So, do you understand the logic of those unwashed Russians who say that, well, our government is just leading us into poverty, shutting down the internet, shutting down Telegram, taking away our cows, and so on? So, it's not the government doing this, it's some agents of influence, Western agents of influence who have infiltrated the government, and they're the ones causing all this, and Vladimir Putin just can't deal with it yet. But it's okay, the time will come and he'll handle it. It's a parallel reality, but that's how it is. Well, and here it's important to note one frightening factor. Even Russian experts close to the Kremlin have stated that currently the Russian economy can only grow through government contracts and combat activity, companies of the military-industrial complex. That is, the Russian economy has ultimately become a hostage of the war. When the war ends, there will be a risk of a total economic collapse. For now, the defense industry is at least somewhat supporting the economy and employment of Russians. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments under this episode, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. If you want to support the work of this YouTube channel, let me remind you, you can do so through donations, subscriptions, or sponsorship on YouTube. All the links and instructions are in the video description. That's it for now. Take care. Goodbye, everyone.